A day after Dwyane Wade appeared via satellite on the Undefeated special on ESPN regarding athletes' violence and responsibility, and his mother also appeared in person on the special to speak out on gun violence from the Southside YMCA in Chicago. Dwyane Wade's cousin was fatally shot while pushing a baby stroller on the south side of Chicago. It happened only a few hours after our First Take special show Friday from that same YMCA, which is less than 2 miles away from the shooting. Wade had the following to say on Twitter: "My cousin," and let me just mention, she's just 32 years old, "was killed today in Chicago. Another act of senseless gun violence. 4 kids lost their mom for no reason. Unreal. Hashtag enough is enough." Stephen A., what's your reaction?
Well, you know, I'm incredibly sad for him. I got a lot of love for D. Wade. He's one of the best people that I know. One of the best, as a human being, one of the best professional athletes I've ever covered in my career. He's just a special, special brother in a lot of different ways. And he's one of the best people. He's a good person. His mother, his sisters, his brother, his cousins, Antoine and the crew, I mean, I know a lot of them, and they're all great people. And my heart goes out to them because they're an incredible family who've withstood a lot of adversity, trials and tribulations, which is well documented throughout their lives, and to come up and through it the way that they have, and for his mother to be the wonderful woman that she is, to have to endure this with her little niece and whatever, your heart just goes out to them. On that note, we obviously I feel an obligation to say that. It goes a little bit deeper for me because we were in Chicago Friday and we were talking about the violence within that community. And I want to emphasize again that police brutality is a separate issue. It is just as real. It is just as poignant. It is something that should not be ignored, and people who bring attention to it are right to do so. But it can't be at the expense of this, because I am of the personal belief that as much and as egregious of a problem as it is in terms of black lives not mattering nearly as much as they should to some law enforcement officials out there and society as a whole on occasion, with the issues that Max brought up in terms of income per capita, education, housing, etc. The reality is that the bigger problem to me permeating through our community is black on black violence. And I bring up that issue because it's a numbers game, and the numbers are working against us. And I'm going to reiterate and beat this point home until the cows come home. White folks make up plus 60% of the population. Latinos are at 17% and projected to be over 30% in a few years. The black community is at 13%, and U.S. Census Bureau reports speculate that between 2035 and 2039, by that time, the black population in the United States of America will only have proliferated by 1 or 2% max. Well, what that means is you're assuming that we'll either be dead or incarcerated. Now, there's another thing that comes to that, because you have blacks who happen to have, Latino ancestry, and they're counted as Latino as opposed to blacks. You can look at it from that perspective. But what really resonates with me is that our community is in a world of trouble, and we had better be real about the fact that black lives may not matter enough to some folks, but it's also not mattering enough to a lot of our own. And we've got to speak about that, and we've got to do something about it, because it's got to stop. Because, again, there were 2 black men arrested and indicted on first-degree murder charges. They didn't mean to target her. They were shooting at somebody else, a rival. But nevertheless, she's been victimized. And we have people in Chicago calling for the National Guard to intervene, which is why we showed up there this Friday. Something has to be done.
Institutional response to the American tragedy in Chicago. It's a humanitarian crisis, may not be what it would otherwise be if it weren't black lives on the line, because the history of this country has been, and this is part of the movement now, the counter movement, that black life is cheap and it needs to be valued, and it hasn't always been, and among some that persists. So there's that, but there's also, look, there's a well-heeled and powerful gun lobby, and the gun manufacturers manufacture millions every year, and as a result, there's an estimated 300 million plus guns. And the reason that's significant here is because whatever the cause is in whose ever neighborhood, et cetera, you know who gets caught in the crossfire? Because you can't get caught in the crossfire of less efficient ways to kill people. But with gun violence, innocents get caught in the crossfire, and those innocents tend to be in densely populated areas of poor people, which includes many African-American communities. Those are the communities that are getting affected by this. And so when Dwyane Wade tweets about it, he's talking about not just violence, but specifically gun violence. In this case, innocent bystanders getting caught in the crossfire. And that is a huge part of the problem. I don't know how you address this topic without at least mentioning that. So I did.
Well, listen, there are white lives being killed by white lives. There are Latino lives being killed by Latinos. It's just that the black community, our number is smaller. And if this continues, it's going to be smaller and smaller. And as a result, it's going to render our community irrelevant in the world of politics and beyond. It is something that has to be said about it. Jim Crow laws were in effect. I don't know the answers to this. I don't know all the causes. People far more knowledgeable than me can speak to it. But Jim Crow laws were in effect for decades. And more lives are being lost today than was being lost back then. What that says to me is that somewhere along the way, even during Jim Crow times, there was a love and an affection and an endearing feeling that we had for one another as our community that does not exist as much today. We need to find out why, and we need to resolve it, and we can't look to white folks and others to do that. Black folks, we got to do that ourselves.
4 children will not see their mother again, and it's heartbreaking. All of our thoughts and prayers are with Dwyane Wade, Nykea Aldridge, their family. She was just 32 years old. More First Take after the break.
I mean, ultimately, it's to bring awareness and make people, realize what's really going on in this country. There are a lot of things that are going on that are unjust, people aren't being held accountable for, and that's something that needs to change. That's something that, this country stands for freedom, liberty, justice for all. And it's not happening for all right now. These aren't new situations. This isn't new ground. It's things that have gone on in this country for years and years and have never been addressed. I'll continue to sit. I'm going to continue to stand with the people that are being oppressed. To me, this is something that has to change. And when there's significant change, and I feel like that flag represents what it's supposed to represent, and this country is representing people the way that it's supposed to, I'll stand.
49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick says he refused to stand during the national anthem Friday due to his views on the country's treatment of racial minorities. He's been outspoken on his Twitter account on civil rights issues and is in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. We had a new voice, Hall of Famer Jerome Bettis, to the conversation. So glad to have you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. What did you make of Kaepernick's protest?
I totally understood what he was getting at. And, everything is kind of morphed into different issues. But I believe the core issue is him wanting to bring light on an issue that is a moral issue in our country. And the concept of peaceful protest is to get us talking about the issues. Unfortunately, right now, we're talking about what he did and not talking about how we can make this country a better country. And that's, part of the problem that we're seeing here. So many people want to focus on exactly what it is he did and try to take it somewhere that it doesn't need to go. What he decided to do was to create a peaceful protest that would be a lightning rod, okay, that would force you to talk about the issue at hand. Okay, and that is the issues that African Americans are facing in this country. Okay, 50 years ago, the peaceful protests that the civil rights movement went through, they went to jail for that. Okay, so the right for him to have this peaceful protest is something that has not been, it's been fought for from that standpoint. So I understand exactly what he's doing, and I would just hope that we would now continue the conversation that he started, that we can look at ourselves through that mirror and say, what can we do better as Americans? Because we all need to come together.
Look, if you want to criticize Kaepernick for something, maybe you can say something along the lines of he had a kind of nebulous, squishy kind of end point. Like, I'm not going to stand until things get better. Well, things have already gotten a lot better. So at what moment do you stand? Because if you're waiting for things to be perfect, we live in an imperfect world. It'll never be perfect. I guess that is legitimate criticism of him. The idea that it's, well, our veterans stand, so should you, is such a diversionary tactic of people who are against what Kaepernick's doing, because he didn't say anything about foreign policy or men and women in uniform. He's talking about policing issues in this country, and how that affects darker-skinned people, basically, which is a legacy of this country's original sin. I think really his message is, and I find this difficult to quibble with or quarrel with, is we need to live up to our ideals. And in that sense, he's honoring the flag by insisting that we live up as a society to what it stands for and to our ideals, and you can actually begin that process precisely because you don't have to stand for the flag. Like, it's such an American thing for him to do, and I think real patriots would support this. I'm very patriotic, and I support this act of patriotism from that point of view.
Only thing I wanted to reiterate is what I said earlier. When people bring up the military, what they must understand is that you're not dishonoring the military by protesting. You're actually honoring them because what you're doing is exercising the rights that they fought for you to have. And that's the important point, that we need to learn from that. But I'm going to take it a step further. You know, if there is any problem that I have with this, any problem at all, is that just as you're willing to bring attention to brutality on the part of police officers, I hope that all of these athletes, all of us in the media and beyond, are willing to bring just as much attention to black-on-black violence. Now, I remember that Dr. Michael Eric Dyson came on the show Friday, and he talked about his neighborhood violence because white folks are killing white folks and Latino folks are killing Latino folks. People who are in the same neighborhoods with one another, that's who they usually kill. I get all of that. What I'm saying is it's a numbers game. And it particularly resonates with me during an election cycle. Okay, we've got somebody on the right, we've got somebody on the left. We know what that story's about. Here's the other side to it. It's a numbers game. So if you've got white folks making up 66% of the population and you've got Latino folks making up 17% of the population, with the Census Bureau report projecting that by the year 2035 to 2039, the population of the Latino community will have doubled in the United States of America, while within the black community it's only increasing by 1%. Then we wonder why some of these problems afflict us. Well, it might have something to do with the numbers game, because the less our numbers are, the less significant we become, and therefore it's easy to get away with.
You mean in the political process?
I'm talking about not just the political process, but even if you're talking about issues like police brutality and beyond. If you killed a Native American, how much would it resonate compared to if a white person were killed? Right. If you killed a black person, how much would it resonate compared to if you killed a Latino in an age where what we're talking about most of the time is immigration? These are the kind of things that you have to pay attention to. It's a numbers game. And then I go to a column today, page 63 of the New York Daily News. Ebenezer Samuel wrote a column that I have to say is absolutely outstanding. It's an outstanding column. Everybody should go and read the New York Daily News today, page 63. He's got a paragraph in here. Allow me to read this. He says, when Colin Kaepernick was done, the rest of the nation could not look the other way either. Unlike LeBron James and Carmelo Anthony and so many of the other athletic activists who have emerged, Kaepernick has forced us to take sides. His actions challenging an increasingly fragmented nation to declare him right or wrong. What Colin Kaepernick was doing in all of this, okay, wasn't just bringing attention to police brutality, but he's doing something that all of us should actually look at just a little bit deeper. He's forcing us to take sides. You know why that's so relevant, Molly, Max, Jerome? Because when you take sides, we know who you are. When you take sides, we know what you stand for. If you have whatever your political affiliation is, whatever you believe, if you feel adamant and you're speaking strongly against this person or that person, but then the election comes and they get 70 million votes, win or lose, what does that tell you about our nation? It tells you something, which is why half the time I'm telling people, shut the hell up. Stop complaining about what you're seeing. Stop complaining about what you're hearing. Chill. Sit back and let them talk. Let's see who has what so we can find out who you are and what you're made of. And when people are voting, come election day, and over 70+ million people vote for one candidate over the other, are we not going to find out what our nation is made of? So if you're Colin Kaepernick and you're not talking about votes and you're not talking about politics, but you're talking about real life, and you take those numbers into the equation, and you take our political landscape into the equation, and you think about all of these different things, and you bring this kind of attention to it, the people who are willing to be distracting in terms of bringing up stuff that he never brought up and trying to divert our attention away from the issue that he sat up there and highlighted, then we learn a little bit something about them, don't we? It's about that sometimes, and that is what a protest personifies as well.
In terms of taking sides and having the courage of your convictions, Bus, you think is it extra courageous? Because Molly and I were, and Stephen, we were talking about this earlier. Is it extra courageous of Colin Kaepernick to take the stand now that he doesn't have much equity in the league because he's sorry? I mean, you see the pictures of him looking half the weight he used to be, dead arm, all this, might get cut. Or is it like, I might be out of the league anyway, and what do I have to lose? How do you think it's going to be perceived?
Well, it's being perceived as being courageous. Obviously, he's in a fight for a starting position. Okay, so, I mean, yes, his cachet is not what it used to be, but he still has an opportunity to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. So, that's something that's, in the background of all of this that's happening. He's still a really good football player. So the fact that he's willing to make this stand in a quarterback battle and he hasn't been healthy, that's saying an awful lot about who he is and what he's trying to do. And, a peaceful protest is meant to be critical. You're going to be criticized for what you do. And that's the whole point. You're going to get a backlash for that. But he stood tall, to his credit, and answered every single question that the reporters have asked him. And that has to be spoken to as well, because a lot of times players they may do something, but they won't stand
yes.
and take all the criticism and all the questions, and he did that.
I tell you this, and I potentially want to close the segment with this. You might have something to say, but I'll try to pull it off. Don't you find it interesting? Yes, he did lose an endorsement deal. I'm talking about Ryan Lochte. Mm-hmm. But this man lied, sullied Team USA, embarrassed himself and to some degree the United States of America in terms of how he represented us. And they were talking about him showing up on Dancing with the Stars. But Colin Kaepernick, in all probability, he might have a job in the NFL, assuming he can still play. But I don't think we should expect any endorsement deals anytime soon.
Or Dancing in the Stars invite.
Exactly. That's the society we're living in, where somebody can lie, humiliate America, and be rewarded, but somebody stands up for a real issue where lives are being affected, and they're denigrated.
If I had a weight loss company, I consider using him as an endorser. I mean, I thought no muscle building company. Damn, Capper, you hit the weight room.
He was never a big guy.
While you're at it, will you hit the weight room?
He was never a big guy.
I'm saying he was bigger than that. Plus, he was bigger than that.
No, he wasn't.
All right, enough from you guys. We heard from these three gentlemen. We want to hear from you at home. Do you have a problem with Kaepernick's national anthem protest? Please go on Twitter. We really want to hear from you. Tell us yes or no. Vote. We'll share those results and continue the conversation a little bit later in this show.